The Second Amendment is one of the most fiercely debated and emotionally charged parts of American law, sparking passionate arguments on both sides of the political spectrum. It reads, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." These words, written over 2 centuries ago, continue to shape the nation's legal and cultural landscape. For many Americans, gun ownership is more than a right, it's a safeguard against tyranny, a symbol of personal freedom, and a tradition deeply rooted in the country's founding ideals. The image of the armed citizen is woven into the fabric of American identity. Yet, as gun violence continues to rise and mass shootings make headlines, calls for stricter regulations have grown louder. This has created a deep and often painful divide between those who prioritize individual rights and those who demand greater public safety. The Supreme Court is now set to decide 2 major Second Amendment cases, a rare and significant move that could fundamentally reshape gun rights and regulations across the country for generations to come. These cases will clarify who can legally own a gun, where firearms can be carried, and just how far government regulation can go in limiting or protecting gun rights. The decisions could set new precedents for decades. The outcomes will have real, immediate effects on daily life for millions of Americans, influencing not just abstract legal principles, but the way people live, work, and feel safe in their communities. As the nation waits for the court's decisions, the future of the Second Amendment hangs in the balance. The rulings could redefine the delicate line between liberty and security in American society. The stakes have never been higher for the future of the Second Amendment, and the entire country is watching to see what comes next. The Supreme Court stands as the ultimate authority in interpreting the Constitution, holding a unique and powerful role in the American legal system. Its decisions are not just about resolving disputes, they shape the very fabric of our society and influence how laws are understood and applied across the nation. By ensuring that laws align with the nation's founding principles, the court acts as a guardian of constitutional rights, protecting individual freedoms, and maintaining the balance of power among the branches of government. Its rulings set legal precedents that all other courts must follow, shaping the rights and liberties of Americans for generations. These decisions often have far-reaching effects, influencing everything from daily life to major national debates. The meaning of the Second Amendment has evolved over time, especially after the landmark 2008 District of Columbia versus Heller decision. In Heller, the court recognized an individual's right to possess firearms for self-defense at home, fundamentally changing the legal landscape. This historic ruling clarified some rights, but left many questions unanswered, particularly about carrying firearms in public and what regulations are constitutionally permissible. The debate over gun rights continued to intensify. In 2022, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen case struck down a New York law that restricted public carry, expanding gun rights even further and sparking new debates across the country. The Bruen decision also introduced a new legal standard for evaluating gun laws, requiring courts to look at the nation's historical tradition when deciding what regulations are allowed. This standard is now central to the 2 major cases currently before the court. The Supreme Court's power lies in its ability to settle these complex debates and set rules that apply nationwide, affecting every state and community. Its decisions on the Second Amendment will impact millions of Americans, shaping the boundaries of gun rights and responsibilities for years to come, and influencing how communities approach safety and regulation. The court's focus on these cases signals a pivotal turning point in the national conversation about gun rights, public safety, and constitutional freedoms. As the justices prepare to rule, the legal landscape is about to change, again, reshaping the future of American law and society. The 2020 tonsballa om danin examberdi censur, fisoidam som indan. 2 Bruen decision revolutionized Second Amendment law. Before Bruen, courts balanced public safety against gun rights, allowing states flexibility in regulation. Bruen replaced this with a strict history and tradition test. Gun laws must align with regulations from the late 1700s or 1800s. Judges now act as historians, searching for historical analogs to modern laws. If no clear precedent exists, the law is likely unconstitutional. This shift has triggered thousands of legal challenges and confusion in lower courts. The Supreme Court is now hearing United States versus Hamani and Wolford versus Lopez to clarify how this test should work. These cases will determine the fate of many current gun laws and set the rules for future regulation. The court's guidance is urgently needed to resolve conflicting lower court decisions. The stakes, whether modern realities can be reconciled with centuries-old traditions. The answers will shape the next era of gun rights in America. United States versus Himani asks a pressing question: can the government ban gun ownership for people who use illegal drugs, even if they aren't under the influence at the time they possess a firearm? The case centers on a federal law that makes it a felony for unlawful drug users to possess firearms, a law that's recently gained national attention, especially after the high-profile prosecution of Hunter Biden. This law has been on the books for decades, but its application is now under intense scrutiny. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that unless someone is actively intoxicated or impaired while possessing a gun, the government can't automatically strip their Second Amendment rights just because they use drugs. This means that simply admitting to drug use, or even testing positive, isn't enough to lose your right to own a firearm. This decision directly conflicts with rulings from other courts and challenges a law that affects millions of Americans, especially as marijuana use becomes more common in states where it's legal locally, but still banned under federal law. The patchwork of state and federal rules creates confusion for both gun owners and law enforcement. The term unlawful user is notoriously vague, and the government's definition has shifted over time. Now, it focuses on habitual users and imposes only temporary bans, but the lack of clarity leaves many unsure of their rights. The Supreme Court must now decide if this law fits the history and tradition test for gun restrictions, or if it overreaches and infringes on constitutional rights. Their decision could set a major precedent. The outcome could fundamentally redefine who is disqualified from gun ownership nationwide, impacting not just drug users, but anyone whose rights might be questioned under vague laws. The case forces the court to weigh the realities of modern drug use and changing social attitudes against the legal traditions and values of the 18th century, when the Second Amendment was written. Whatever the Supreme Court decides, its ruling will have sweeping consequences for gun rights, public safety, and how the law adapts to a changing America. The government argues that disarming habitual drug users is consistent with historical practices of restricting gun rights for those deemed irresponsible. They cite early American laws disarming the intoxicated or mentally ill, claiming today's drug users fit this tradition. The ban, they say, is temporary and targets those who pose a risk. Himani's lawyers counter that the founding era only restricted gun rights for people actively causing public disturbances, not for private, past drug use. They argue the law is too vague, what counts as a user, and unfairly punishes people following state marijuana laws. The conflict between state and federal law leaves millions in legal limbo. Gun rights advocates want the court to limit bans to those actively impaired, not anyone with a history of drug use. The Supreme Court's ruling will clarify how far the government can go in restricting gun rights based on personal behavior. The decision will set a precedent for future cases involving status-based gun bans. Wolford v. Lopez challenges Hawaii's law banning guns on most private commercial property, unless owners post signs allowing them. Similar laws in New York and California have sparked legal battles over whether states can default to no guns in public-facing businesses. Plaintiffs argue this rule guts the right to carry for self-defense, making most public places off-limits. They want the default reversed guns allowed unless explicitly banned by the owner. The case pits gun rights against property rights. Should business owners or gun carriers decide who can bring firearms inside? Lower courts are split, creating legal chaos across state lines. The Supreme Court's decision will set a nationwide rule for carrying guns on private property open to the public. The outcome will reshape where Americans can legally carry firearms in daily life. Hawaii argues its law respects property owners' rights, letting them control whether guns are allowed in their businesses. The state claims this approach is rooted in history. Property owners have always had the right to set rules on their land. The law doesn't ban guns outright. It just sets a default that owners can override. Supporters say this protects business owners from pressure and potential conflict. Gun owners argue the law is a backdoor attempt to undermine the right to carry, confining it to a few public spaces. They say there's no historical tradition of blanket bans on carrying guns in commercial spaces. The default, they argue, should be yes, unless a property owner objects. The Supreme Court must decide whether the right to carry trumps property rights, or vice versa. The ruling will define the practical limits of the Second Amendment in public life. The Supreme Court's rulings in Hamani and Woolford will have sweeping effects on gun regulation and daily life. If the court upholds the ban on gun ownership for drug users, it affirms the government's power to disarm those it deems irresponsible. Striking down the law could allow millions of drug users, including those using state-legal marijuana, to own guns. The court might also choose a narrow path, limiting bans to those with ongoing addiction or active impairment. In Woolford, striking down Hawaii's law would make carrying guns in shops and restaurants the default, unless owners post signs. Upholding the law would empower states to create large gun-free zones in commercial spaces. These cases are about more than guns. They test the Supreme Court's role in resolving deep national divisions. The decisions will affect the balance between federal and state power, individual rights, and community safety. As the nation awaits, the court's choices will shake the foundation of the Second Amendment. Every American will feel the impact of these landmark rulings.